wrap-up time. You're going to be hearing about every single book, all the details, what we rated it, who's it by, how many pages, what's the genre, do I recommend it, all the things in this little video. So here we go. In total, I read 10 books this month, which I feel like is pretty good. I'm pretty proud of that. First book that we read this month was The Wives by Tarryn Fisher. This book had 320 pages, was like a psychological thriller type of vibe, and we only gave it 3 stars. This book definitely has a lot of triggers, and so if you're interested after what I tell you about this book, you want to read it, I really recommend looking up the triggers first, because this was definitely a book where it kind of took me aback because I wasn't expecting as many triggers as there were. Basically, it is about a woman who has a husband, and she is not his only wife. Her and these other wives have him like on a kind of like a schedule, and it's not like what you would see on TV where it's like what, Sister Wives or whatever it's called. It's not like that. They don't all live together. They don't all take care of each other like that. They live like far away from each other, and he just splits his time. The main character doesn't know anything else about the other wives except for maybe their name and like a couple details that he'll say here and there. We got this thinking that it was going to be amazing because the premise seemed so good, and in the beginning I even have like things underlined. When we were reading it, it was originally kind of reading like it was going to be like a statement piece about how women can feel in like the traditional wife role. It was talking about how she was giving her whole self to him. She wasn't taking care of herself the same way. She wasn't doing any of the things that she liked to do because her whole personality, her whole sense of self, everything was focused on this man who she only got to see once a week. And even then, when she got to spend time with him, she wasn't even enjoying it fully because she was so worried about not pleasing him. I just feel like it was a cop-out kind of ending. I felt like they used some language in here, like the way they talked about certain things, especially about mental health, I really didn't like. My cat. Hold on. Kitty. Kitty. The culprit. Ugh. She's been crying out in the hallway, so I had to go get her. Anyways, it's not my favorite. Complete turnaround from the way I felt about the last book. We have Reckless by Lauren Roberts. This is the second in a trilogy. Powerless trilogy, if you're not aware, if you haven't heard about this, which I would be very surprised because it's pretty popular. I loved every second of this book. There are 377 pages. It is a YA, I believe, fantasy. There's no smut, so I'm assuming it's going under the YA umbrella. It's romantasy. It was so good. It was so good. Now, the thing I will say is that this book compared to the first book is very different. If you loved Powerless and you wanted this to be like Powerless, I understand why you didn't rate it as highly as I did, but we gave this a 5 because I ate this up. I, in the first book, really wanted more of just straight up Peyton and Kai time, which is what the series is about. It's about a girl named Peyton who lives in a world where everyone has powers, and if you don't have powers, you are hunted, killed, or pushed out into the desert because they don't want you. And the male main character, Kai, is actually the one who specifically hunts people that don't have powers. And of course, they fall for each other. There's like Hunger Games type vibe in the first book. But like I was saying, I really wanted a lot of Peyton Kai time that I didn't really get to see because we were so focused on the world building and the trials and everything that was involved with the first book, especially like just setting up the story. There's so much that there has to be said. So I feel like I really wanted more Peyton Kai time, and this was all Peyton and Kai time. From start to finish, Peyton and Kai, Kai and Peyton time. Sam and I just treated this like a straight up romance. Barely any plot. Really just like a cat and mouse type of situation. Trying to find each other, going back and forth, whatever. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but I loved it. The next book that we read was Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. This has 534 pages. It's romance. It's grumpy sunshine is what I would say is like the main trope of it. But this woman named Naomi, she leaves her fiance at the church, comes running to get away from him because she doesn't like him, and ends up running into a lot of problems when her twin sister calls asking for her help and ends up ditching her, stealing all her stuff, and leaving her with a niece that Naomi never knew about. And then here comes Knox, which is the main male character. He helps her when he doesn't know why, and he likes her and he doesn't know why. I definitely thought that it was too long, and I absolutely despised the third act conflict that was in here because it was definitely the type that I felt was so unnecessary, and I felt like rather than having that, you could have just ended the book because it was already so long. That was the only thing that made me like knock points of it, and then there were other parts that I felt were a little cringy sometimes. Like some of the smut in here was a little cringy and I didn't enjoy that aspect of it. There's a lot of LGBT representation in here, which I enjoyed. So we ended up giving it a 3.5. The next two books that we have kind of go together because it's the second and third in a trilogy. Kingdom of the Cursed, Kingdom of the Feared are the second and third books in the Kingdom of the Wicked series. Kerri Maniscalco is the author. I'm not quite sure in terms of page count. I believe it was like late 300s for each. This trilogy is following a girl who has a twin sister. They are both witches, and one day Amelia ends up finding her twin sister has been murdered, and so she ends up going to all sides of the world, the underworld, everything, to try to figure out what happened to that twin sister. So she ends up calling every demon that you could possibly think of and try to get some answers, and the one that answers is the Prince of Wrath from the underworld, and you're just kind of following how they figure out what happened in the murder. They're falling in love, they're trying to go through all these different worlds, like underworld, human world, whatever. All these things. There's demons, there's monsters, there's werewolfy type things. The world was definitely fun to get into. The series is labeled as like a YA romantasy series, and I highly reject that label. First book definitely is YA. I will say that 110%. The first book is a YA book. But if you want to go into the rest of the series, second and third, if you want to know anything else about Throne of the Fallen, the other books coming out, they are very spicy. They get really into depth about stuff. So if that is not your jam, I don't recommend reading this. Don't even start with the first book because you're just gonna be able to keep going, so I don't recommend it if you don't want any spice. I do think that these books were a little too drawn out, and that's why we didn't give them as high of ratings. I mean, Sam liked this series a lot more than I did, but I felt like I kind of read it at the wrong time. I was more in the mood for just regular romance during this time. We like these books. I'd recommend these books. So we ended up giving Kingdom of the Cursed, got a 3.5, and then Kingdom of the Feared, I gave a 4. Next book that we have is another 5-star, another book that it just came right when it needed, and that is A Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. The main female character in this book is named Anna. She is a struggling artist, agrees to marry a guy named Liam when she's in college to get around a residential issue in terms of housing for school, and she thinks that she married him, divorced him after they were done needing each other for housing, and hasn't thought about him since. Actually, they are still married, and Liam actually comes back to talk to her about what is still needed out of their marriage, and she didn't even know that they were still married. Basically, in order for him to get money from his family in terms of like, I believe it's an inheritance, yeah, he has to prove that they're together. It talks a lot about the difference between the regular people and rich people, like super rich, like stupid rich, like rent out an island rich. And I just found that so interesting. I really enjoyed the dynamic between them because she kept bringing them back to reality, where she would walk into a room that I now gotten used to because they lived in luxury for so long, and she would be so obviously taken aback by how much money they were spending, by how extravagant everything was, by how wasteful they were being, and she would bring them back to real life, and I enjoyed that aspect of it. I loved their banter, I loved their chemistry. I felt like it was natural, which is kind of hard to come by sometimes. I feel like you either love the book or you hate the book when it comes to these authors, but this was definitely a book that I was obsessed with. Next book we read was Girl, Serpent, Thorn. We rated this a 4 stars. It was super short, super sweet, YA, so there was no smut. The main female character is bisexual, so there was LGBT representation in here, which I always love to see. And I really enjoyed this. We rated it a 4 stars, and I felt like it was really like a breath of fresh air. So basically, this is very similar to the Shatter Me concept, where it is about a girl who cannot be touched. Rather than being like dystopian like how Shatter Me is, it goes the fantasy route, and she had been cursed by the like monster demon type creatures in this world a long time ago, and so she's lived her whole life not being able to be touched even by her own mother. It was really good, especially if you don't want something spicy and you want something fast and you want something that isn't crazy with the world building. The world building was very manageable when it came to this book. It wasn't anything super complicated. Next book that we read was Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig. This is the second in the Twisted Crowns duology. We had read One Dark Window, which is the first one, a while ago, and it honestly was taking us way too long to get to the second one, so I'm really glad that we got to this because it was really good. I liked it better than the first one. This book takes place in a fantasy world where magic makes you sick. So basically it is considered that you're like infected when you are someone with magic. It takes over your body in some way. There's some sort of like bad aftermath of it, it's basically treated like an illness, and the only way that people can use magic and not get sick in this world, build these cards, and all these cards are able to do a specific thing based off of what they say. So there's a maiden card, for example, that will make you beautiful. There's another card that will make you be able to control another person. There's another card that makes you be able to read people's minds. There's all these different cards for very specific things, and if you hold the card, you have the magic. If you don't hold the card, you don't have the magic. I really enjoyed this book. I felt like it was a concept that I've never heard of before. I like this book better than the first one because I felt like the first one kind of took too long to get to the point. We ended up rating this a 4.25. The next book that we read was Pestilence. Now this is by Laura Thalassa. This is book 1 in the Four Horsemen series, and we ended up rating it a 3.75, and it's just shy of like 400 pages. It's like 390 something ish, and it is a romantasy. This book follows Pestilence, who is one of the Four Horsemen who has begun the apocalypse. It takes place about 5 years after the first sighting of the Horsemen, so the apocalypse is well into effect, and if you don't know what Pestilence is, he is the one getting everyone sick, and then he meets a human that he cares about. Sarah tries to kill him, and when she fails, he says, "You're coming with me." And she ends up being his prisoner. I did feel at certain points that this book was a little cringy. It definitely read like a Wattpad story in certain aspects where the smut didn't kind of make sense, where it felt like the plot was a little bit rushed to get to the smut. There was so much hate and so much anger and so much tragedy that Sarah was focused on when she tried to kill him, that when he survived that attempt and took her hostage and was hurting her, she just all of a sudden was okay with it, and all of a sudden was attracted to him, and all of a sudden didn't care that much. I don't know. That was the only thing that really bothered me, was I felt like it jumped too quickly. The last book that we read for this month was Impulse. For at least a year we have had this book, and we just keep not picking it up because we've been kind of intimidated. One, not really because of the size of it, because it is small, but because of the writing style. Now if you can see, the book is written in poem format. Throughout the entire thing, it goes back and forth between 3 point of views, between 3 teenagers all going through different types of mental issues. We'll look at the triggers or even skip and just leave this video because this does talk a lot about mental health and things of that nature. Tony is addicted to varying substances. Vanessa self-harms quite a bit, and Connor actually tried to commit suicide and failed. And it's following these 3 teenagers in a mental hospital, going through trying to recover, trying to heal, trying to learn how to cope. I definitely enjoyed this book a lot. I felt like it was definitely a lot in certain aspects. Felt like it was kind of hard to understand sometimes, especially in the beginning. It was a little hard to follow because of the format of it, so that might push you away a little bit, but I would really recommend, if you can handle these subjects, to continue, because I did feel like it was a good book, and it definitely discussed a lot of things that a lot of people feel. I feel like if you can relate to this and this isn't too triggering to you, or even if you don't and you've never had any of these feelings, you don't have to, and you don't struggle with any of the things being talked about in this book, it's definitely very eye-opening. And I don't have a rating for this. I feel the same way I did about when I read The Perks of Being a Wallflower, that it talked too much about mental health and in too real of a way that I feel weird rating it. This could have easily been someone's real story. That is it. That is all I have done. Those 10 books that we read. I hope you guys enjoy hearing about all the books that we read. I really enjoyed them. I felt like it was a good reading month. We had 2 5-stars, which is pretty unheard of. A couple books that I don't necessarily love, but I still am glad that I got off the TBR and that I read, because I definitely had heard a couple things about them. So I feel like it was really good reading month overall. I'm really excited for this next month. I feel like it is going to be the best reading month yet. I am so excited for the books that we're going to be reading. So please stay tuned to that. Please subscribe, please like and comment and do all those things. Bye.